subscribe now and press the bell icon. Never miss an update.
This is an endeavor to provide information and analysis of issues pertaining to the citizens of India, an effort for India by Indians. Today, we present a panel discussion on prospects and challenges for Indian foreign policy post-COVID scenario. We are honored to have with us Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, Professor Neeran Gautam, and Mr. Shyam Znwar. A brief intro about our panelists. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. He has been a member of the Indian Foreign Service. He has served in the Indian missions in Bangladesh, Mongolia, USA, Russia, Sweden, Nigeria, Libya, Malta, and Jordan. In the Ministry of External Affairs, he worked in the economic, West Asia, North Africa, Gulf, and consular divisions. He has worked as Deputy Chief Mission in the rank of Ambassador in the Embassy of India and has served as Ambassador of India to Jordan, Libya, and High Commissioner to Malta. He is a member of the All India Management Association, the Delhi Management Association, as well as that of Oxford and Cambridge Society of India, and Secretary of the Association of Indian Diplomats. As a peace ambassador, Mr. Trigunayat is closely associated with the interfaith dialogue, peace and harmony efforts in the society, especially through the Unity Dialogue and World Congress of Religions at Kazakhstan. He knows French, Russian, and Spanish languages. We are very honored to have you with us, sir. Professor Neeran Gautam. He is a professor of strategy and disaster management. He did his master's in business management and doctorate in management logistics from Netherlands. He also has master's in mass communication and journalism. He has been teaching for the last 20 years and has been associated with some of India's best B schools like IMT Ghaziabad and IMK and other international business schools. He has worked in pharmaceutical, imaging, and aviation industry for almost 20 years. He has presented research papers in India and in countries like Germany, Netherlands, Spain, and US. He is presently the CEO of Indo Analytics. Mr. Shyam Znwar. He has around 24 years experience in global M&A and strategic alliances and JVs as investor as well as advisor. He has always been involved in strategic sourcing, PE funding, debt fundraising, post-acquisition integration, market development, imports and exports, concept selling, and business development. He is also a visiting faculty to the Indian Institute of Management and Indian Institute of Packaging. He is currently the director at Indo Analytics, handling strategic initiatives. As the topic suggests, today, we shall be discussing issues around the current trade and demographic power struggle around the world. How can peace and policies be synced? And how the Indian foreign policy stands now and the challenges ahead. Request Professor Neeran ji to take the discussion forward.
Thank you, Priya. So nice of you. And I welcome all of you today's discussion. Anil ji, to begin with, one which is very important for our viewers to understand what we should understand a foreign policy is all about.
Well, at the outset, I would like to thank you, Professor Gautam, for inviting me to discuss on your program and to other friends who have joined us today. This is indeed one of the most important aspects. I mean, what is the foreign policy? We keep hearing about that. The foreign policy is nothing but an extension of the domestic policy abroad. When you try to serve the national interest of your country. Now, what are the national interests? National interest essentially is that whatever the requirements that a country has in order to excel across, in order to create good friendships, because you need friendships across the world. As you mentioned about wars, you mentioned about alliances, you mentioned about the problems for which everyday solutions are required. But that is because of the dynamic nature of the world. Now, the purpose of the foreign policy is to achieve those objectives, whether they are in the field of political relationship, whether they are in the field of security relationship, whether they are in defense, whether in the field of economic objectives that a country wants to achieve, whether you want to attract foreign direct investment, which you need today very much, even if you want to become an Atmanirbhar Bharat. So that these are the things that are a continuous requirement. So, and you have to raise the standard of your people. You have to bring in so that they become modernized in the process. So all these aspects eventually coalesce to provide a country a set of objectives that it wishes to pursue in an external environment. Now, external environment is not always uh, very positive for you. There are so many competitions. For example, if you were to look at attracting foreign investment, at any given time, there are at least 70 to 80 countries that are competing for the same capital in different countries. So if your policies are not good, if your country is not attractive enough, you will have a problem in finding competition. That's when we talk about, let's say, China. Why is it that so many companies have gone to China? Because China in the 1980s changed its whole pattern to suit the requirements of the multinational companies, the Western companies, when they were looking at it. Why the Chinese people countries leaving from China are more going to Vietnam or to South Asia or other ASEAN countries? The reason is simple, because they can identify their own parameters in which they can operate efficiently, effectively, transparently, and more proactively. In fact, every company that comes into a country, it wants a transparent rule-based system where it can operate and operate to its advantage, because nobody comes in any country for the purpose of just charity. They come here to make money. And so if there is no problem, then they continue and invest in those countries. So therefore, there is always a competition. Likewise, there is those countries like America or China or Russia, for example, they are big in manufacturing arms and ammunition. So they need their market. So for those markets, they come to the country, and they use all kinds of methodologies to get into that market. So basically, in today's time and age, the economic diplomacy has taken a much greater salience in the interactions that happen between a country and the other country. As far as India is concerned, our foreign policy was governed by external environment. As you know, that when we became independent, at that time, the foreign policy had to be changed to suit the environment, because we had come out of the colonialism, and we did not want to get back into the Cold War between any of the two blocs. Therefore, India got into a new system with some like-minded countries and created a non-aligned movement. It served its purpose until a certain time. Thereafter, the situation again globally changed. Today, we are hearing the name of Indo-Pacific. We are hearing the problem between Russia and US and China and the EU and anywhere else. So currently, today, because of the COVID-19, I believe that the world is once again in a very big flux. And we must not forget that any of these problems that happen, they are also the cause of opportunities. They create a churn in the international system. And if you remember that after the Second World War, new Bretton Woods institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, the WHO, all these institutions came up. United Nations came up. But in 75 years, United Nations needs to reinvigorate itself, has to change its dynamic in order to reflect the realities of the 21st century. So this is the basic. So that's one of the objectives. Today, India's one of the major objectives is somehow to not get caught into the war between the two powers, because another Cold War 2.0, which is going to be far more disastrous because it will have far many ramifications, is something in India is likely to get caught, being one of the biggest powers in the region. And therefore, this is one of the major objectives of the Indian foreign policy, is that our interests are served abroad, our interests in multilateral environment are served, and the multilateral institutions become capable of delivering to that. They have been under tremendous stress, even because of President Trump's policies, for that matter. So we know that the countries and their own inherent limitations within these institutions. So where does we are still a very big country, very big power, but then there are 190 other countries, of whom large number of them are smaller countries with hardly much of capabilities or the capacity to look after their own interests. So therefore, you have these alliances that come up, whether it is African Union, whether it is European Union, whether it is ASEAN or whatever. So these countries try to get together to serve their interests in a collective manner. That's what essentially is the situation. And India has the privilege of having very good relationships across the board and has been continuing to do that, even though it is coming under stress.
Sir, with special reference, it has been mandated that we have to integrate economic policy with the political diplomacy. Right? So, but why there are, still certain countries which do not follow the terms. They dictate the terms, rather like China, for instance. They try to dictate the terms of the Indian foreign policies. Why is it so?
Well, they do not dictate. It's the international environment. And I'm afraid to say that despite all the growth and everything, we are seeing a tremendous amount of bullying, authoritarianism in the conduct of foreign policy by the major powers. And this has happened not only by China, but this has happened done by the US in the past. Even Russia has done it. All the big powers, they keep on aggressing on some of their neighbors, and the neighborhood issues are always there. As far as China is concerned, it is a rogue power in many ways. Nobody ever thought that its rise today of China is giving jitters to the United States of America and to countries in the region. That is very much there, especially India, because China considers India as probably the only country in the region that can challenge its hegemony. And because our political systems are very different, we are the largest democracy in the world. Then we are a big country with a big power, with military base, with our industrial base, with our third largest economy. So India has all the credentials. Plus, it is a benevolent power. And that is the difference. And that is why China feels a bit threatened on that. But China has tried to do that not only to us, but to all the countries in the region. It has been fighting with the United States, whether it's trade wars or whether cyber wars or whether in other contexts, competing for influence and decimating the US influence that has been happening. So both these powers have been fighting one another. And that's why we see that the problem that has happened ever since the onset of especially the Trump administration, that there has been more arbitrariness in the conduct of foreign policy. In fact, the way the foreign policy today is being conducted by the biggest power is through tweets. And that has never happened like that. And they could have a meaning, they could not have a meaning. But when a powerful country's leader tweets something, that creates jitters around the world. And if it is negative, similarly, likewise, the Chinese, it's an opaque system. It is a system where there is no transparency. There is the internal turmoil that is taking place because of the Chinese Communist Party. Because it has generated this COVID virus that has taken the whole world to its knees. So I believe that because of that, in order to deflect interest, and I must say that what China is doing is not an aberration. It is frankly is a pattern. It has been doing it ever since. Last year, 2019, I was reading somewhere there were more than 600 violations on the border. Now, they say that the border is undefined, fine, but we have agreed to a certain border. Why do you come in and why do you want to ingress into our side and then continue to do it again and again? It happened in 2017 in Doklam. It happened several places. This time it is happening in Ladakh, which is, again, strategically extremely important from our point of view. And the best part is that India is no longer ready to give in to the Chinese ingress. And it is responding to it in kindness. But India also does not want war. It has never wanted a war, but has been inflicted on us. And therefore, it is continuing to indulge in dialogue, to engage them in dialogue through diplomacy or whatever is possible. Our military and diplomatic establishment is working together with China. But at the same time, China today is cornered globally. But as a result, what they are doing, they are behaving again like in a more rogue fashion. They are trying to have this bull warrior diplomacy. They are indulging in the mask diplomacy. I don't call mask is supplying mask, but masked ED, mask diplomacy. So they are creating their own rules of system. They don't want to follow the rules in their neighborhood against the ASEAN countries. They are going to 100 kilometers to claim the Indonesian island. They do not respect the Philippine, when the International Court of Justice gave a verdict in favor of Philippines. They would not do that. Instead, what are they doing? They are deep pockets. They have huge resources available to them, which they have done courtesy the Western countries and the companies, that they are using it as a great leverage, which is called checkbook diplomacy, to essentially corner a lot of our neighbors, providing them a lot of funds. And we are seeing it today, what has happened in Nepal, what is happening in Sri Lanka, what is happening in Bangladesh, or earlier in Maldives. So in Afghanistan, everywhere the Chinese are, whether in Africa, that's another place where we are having a competition with them. Now they are moving in a big way into the Middle East. and are becoming a major economic partner of almost all countries. And they have come up with this new project called BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. And that Belt and Road Initiative is a reflection, economic reflection, I would say, of their hegemonistic ambition.
I have an observation. US had been a big economic power. Russia had been a big economic power. And for the last couple of decades, even China has been a big economic power. No sooner India arrived as an emerging economic power, the entire world is into a state for turmoil. To me, it appears for the last one decade, I've been listening about World War III. Every day we stand on the door of World War III, some issue or the other issue. To me and to you, what do you think? It is making foreign policies becoming more important, or managing foreign policies is becoming important?
In fact, both. You mentioned the word World War III. Now, there are observers who say that we are actually going through the World War III. It's a different kind. The whole world is fighting against one virus, and which has brought all the economies to its heel. And that's precisely what happened. I mean, large number of people are dying. This is the result of a war. When large number of people die, infrastructure remains, but it's of no use because you don't even have the health infrastructure. None of the countries, whether from United States down to a small island nation, nobody was prepared. Nobody is prepared even today to deal with this kind of the whole thing has changed. On the contrary, the whole world, you mentioned about the US, you mentioned about Russia, but both those countries were continuing to balance the power in the world. They were balancing during the Cold War. When Soviet Union was decimated, then you have one hyperpower, and that is the United States of America. Now, which dictated its terms, which is one of its arms and ammunition industries, one of the biggest in the world, the most sophisticated weaponry there. In fact, the kind of weapons, mass destruction or otherwise, that they can destroy the world many times over. We already have that. But now what we are seeing is that instead of a collective effort, which the world should be doing it in order to fight this particular menace, which is brought from China and is a gift of China to the world, is actually creating a major problem. And what we are seeing is the greater protectionism is happening. Now, India obviously has a very different kind of a foreign policy domain. India thinks in terms of, I should say, and it is true also to a great extent in our day-to-day discourse, that is, we believe in a Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. You know, the world is one family. Anything happens there, we should be there. It should not, I mean, I must not say, but even now, as soon as the problems happen, you know, about the COVID, because that is the biggest crisis that is facing all of us today. India was one of the first countries that, despite our limitations, despite the huge population that we have to provide for the medical thing, despite having inadequate health infrastructure in the country, India provided to almost 133 countries the whatever drugs or medical assistance was required. We sent rapid response teams to many countries. And it is not the first time only in COVID. Whenever there is a problem in our neighborhood or elsewhere, India becomes somehow a nation as a first responder nation. So that is the strength of India, and that's what giving a thought to China that somehow contain India within the South Asian region alone, because India has not only the global power ambitions, but also has the capability to transcend the initial hesitations within the country and in our neighborhood. So what do? You create blocks around you. You create problems around you. The string of pearl strategy. We have seen it. So those are the like creating ports and all, creating some kind of thing so that you're always worried about doing things at home. So India's rise, that's what I mentioned, benevolent. It is a rise collaborative in nature. It has always been, and the foreign policy is not towards hegemony, whereas the countries which you mentioned and China, all three of them had the hegemonistic ambition.
Anilji, I have one question that we started from NAM and today we are part of the Quad. Now NAM was a kind of thing where we were not talking to anybody and everybody was our equal distant partner or something. And today when we are within Quad, naturally Quad is against China. Now, in an integrated world, is it possible for us to keep China away from any, say, important uh, international grouping? And can we still survive without them or with them?
Well, Liz,
It happens, sir.
so non-alignment was a necessity in a way where you thought that you could protect your interests better if you are non-aligned and you take decisions on the basis of issues. You know, what are the issues and how you behave. So that's why sometimes you felt that America was right, other time you felt Russia or Soviet Union was right. So you took and that's what helped us a lot until the 80s. And until then, India was very, very active. But since then, the situation has started changing. The rise of China began. Then the world was, then we saw that disintegration of Soviet Union happened. And therefore, Russia became a power trying to come back on the global scene, which became very difficult for it to do that. So today, what is the situation is that we have a major power in USA, and then we have a power which is trying to create, displace that number one power because it's economically number two, but it can become number one at any time. So that is the problem. So today we are on the verge of Cold War 2.0. Now in this situation, India has changed its policy to some extent. Now Indo-Pacific is a construct which is essentially focusing on our region because the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden and all the trade routes, security, everything is imperative through West Asia from our point of view, through Africa. Now, when we were talking about it, when Prime Minister Modi went to Shangri-La and dialogue in Singapore, he spoke about what is India's vision of Indo-Pacific. India's vision was that there should be free lanes, free traffic and everything. Nobody should have problems for the other, but it was inclusive in nature. Inclusive means China was not excluded out of it. What you mentioned that is against China is actually the US policy of the Indo-Pacific. US looks at Indo-Pacific in a different context. India looks at it as an inclusive member. That is why China, but what has happened is China's aggression into India, and not only into India, but in the other ASEAN countries, whose centrality is a key driver for the Indo-Pacific. Even though Indo-Pacific only has 4 countries as of now, or if you quad countries, if you say quad plus, then you can join South Korea and Vietnam. But ASEAN, the 10-member ASEAN countries are the main central, but their economies are also very linked. And they equally suffer in the maritime domain from the China's aggression. And therefore, it is now today the Americans have decided to block into China for whatever reason. We know various reasons, but they have decided to close in onto China. Now they want, we have been talking, as you know, in the last few years, at least 10 years onward, the relationship with the US has been increasing in a strategic manner, in a defense and strategic security perspective. And very strongly, there is interoperability and that all of that has happened. The US has become a very major defense and security partner for India today. Now, that is the problem, bone of contention between India and China to some extent. Russia also does not understand the India's concept of Indo-Pacific. It feels that it is against China. So what India so far, we have not said that it is against China from our point of view. Besides, if you see, the American construct is, or for that matter, the Japanese, is limited to the Pacific part of it. Whereas for India, it goes up to east of Africa. So from our point of view, the region is far wider, far broader. But now I think what I can read is the Indian policy, and foreign policy is always dynamic because your interests change, the circumstances outside change. And therefore, in order to serve your own national interest, you have to have selective alliances. And that's where we are here. But at the same time, we are looking at selective alliances, whether it is US or with any other country. But at the same time, we are also balancing it out. For example, if there is a quad, we also have a Russia, India, China dialogue, which has become just met. We also have Japan, America, and India dialogue. We are part of the BRICS. We are part of IPSA. We are part of the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So India is trying to work on all these by keeping actually wherever it is advantageous to us to operate in whichever field, without going to war with any country at the moment. But if the war becomes imminent, then they'll have to make choices.
Good, sir. I think we have approximately 2 minutes to conclude. Maybe
we have still 15-20 minutes.
I got a message already for less than a minute. So maybe it is just going to.
I asked Bharat for 1 hour. Anyway, I'll put my question. That is very important. Anilji, as one of the key issues, the objectives of foreign policy that we forget many of the times is the Indian diaspora, living abroad, living outside the country, because that's a big voice which is living outside the country and in direct touch with the people and the culture of different countries. There have been so many changes, though there are so many complaints also with the high commissions. You understand better than that. What has been the changes in terms of listening to their voices and taking their voices, and they also serve as a part of the representatives of the ambassadors serving to different countries.
Well, there have been, the Indian diaspora in the 50s and 60s were virtually left to themselves. And when people were going to study abroad or do something abroad, they were not even looked at it. We thought it was a brain drain at that time. But after, I would say, 1980s and 1990s, there has been a complete change in the thinking as far as diaspora's country. When you mentioned about the diaspora, in the beginning, as I said, that the Indian diaspora was being seen, especially by the government, as a brain drain, that people are not staying back in India, they go on various kind of things, and they will not come back, they'll not contribute to the country and all that. But however, 30 years later, things have completely changed. And when we started looking at that, we owe a great deal to the diaspora in the West, especially in the developed world, because they helped India's IT revolution essentially can be attributed to the diaspora. The lot of investments that came into India, especially the financial institutional investors and the major companies, American companies or the British or the Canadian companies or the other European companies that came, largely because of India's attraction at the same time, but because somewhere we had some of these Indian origin people working in those, whom we call PIOs. Now, they became really, they still are very much attached to India. They had a problem that there was no instrument whereby they could interact with the Indian government. So the Indian government actually, if you know that there was a new ministry was created, Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs. We have around 30 million Indians abroad. Now there was a separate minister and they did everything. And then even at one time during Mr. Vajpayee's time, actually, we even had some NRI ambassadors in some of the countries. So that is one diaspora. The second diaspora, which is extremely important from our point of view, is the diaspora in the West Asia, especially in the Gulf countries. Now they are almost remitting $16 billion a year to India, almost 9 million people. It's extremely important, apart from the energy security and all that we have. Now they land up into many kinds of problems in these countries. Now, in order to provide that, the Indian government has actually started many bilateral dialogues and agreements with the countries for protecting our labor. The Indian embassies have their shelter houses and homes and 24/7 lines. They have these lok adalats, which they hold ambassador personally are responsible. And then when you saw Mrs. Sushma Swaraj as the minister, she was the people's minister, frankly. Even at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, she'll be sending the tweets to various ambassadors, asking them to address the problem being faced by an Indian. So I believe that there has been a much greater focus now. We have the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, we have the regional Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. Now we have created an OIC card for them. They wanted dual nationality. Unfortunately, our system does not permit that. But OIC is as good as a dual citizenship. They can
property is as good as the dual citizenship.
Yes, they can't just contest for the office of the government. Now, the most important thing, if you see with the Prime Minister Modi, ever since he became the Prime Minister in 2014, even before it used to, but the scale has been increased. I mean, he goes and makes it a point to talk to all the community everywhere. And we have seen that when he went to Texas. I mean, he took President Trump along with him in that. That has never happened before. So today the power of
when you take the name of
we have
Modi, I really wonder, in 1947 when Nehru became the prime minister, it was a default foreign policy with a lot of, glitches, and you can understand. And from Nehru to Indira Gandhi to Rajiv Gandhi to Atal Bihari Vajpayee, in between we had Morarji Desai, also Lal Bahadur Shastri, and now the Modi. So there is a state of transition from Nehru to Modi. One final question, because you also have a paucity of time. One final question, because India cannot live without politics. Among the so many prime ministers of the country from 1947, you know it much better than that. If we try to map the performance in terms of the foreign policy, from defective foreign policy to constructive foreign policy, what is your final take?
Well, and I'm not being diplomatic. I'm just taking the time frame that you have mentioned. There were different challenges in different periods of time for different prime ministers. If you come to think of it, the first decade or first 2 decades, at that time, India was just coming out of a colonial, a poor country. The basic idea was to create the basic infrastructure, create the basic instrument, so that the country was dependent on foreign aid, for food aid, for all kinds of things. So idea was to get by there and to come on your own this thing. Then Indira Gandhi's time, you had other problems. I mean, there were different problems. We created Bangladesh in a way, if you come to think of it. That was a major achievement of India's foreign policy. Then we come to the later parts, it has just been going on. Then economic liberalization that happened during Narasimha Rao's time, which opened India to with the Troika, basically economic liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Our economy was not globalized enough, even today, but it is continuing to do that. What has happened with Prime Minister Modi is there are two things. One is that he is a visionary leader. He thinks straightforward. He wants things done in a particular way, right? And he has an approach, whether and his personal or rather persona is such that he has developed these a lot of good personal relationships. He is seen as a strong leader because after a very long time, or we are having a government that is really can say it's a very vastly representative government of the people, right? So he's a strong leader, and today is the age of the strong leader. And I must say that the way the diplomacy today is conducted is starting at the highest level. Even in the embassies, you will see the ambassadors personally are involved in all kinds of diplomacies. Likewise, the leaders at the prime minister level, the president level. I mean, if you remember that Harley Davidson, we had the duties, and Trump personally called Prime Minister Modi to reduce the duties. Now, so it is happening at such a level for even these kind of small things. So I believe that today it is more action oriented. Let me tell you something about, we used to have look east policy, right? Today it is act east policy. Act east. So action has been added. We used to think west. Now it is act west. West means Middle Eastern countries. I mean, you can imagine that Middle East, I can just give you a small example before I close. You see at the, we are able to manage good relations with Russia, with even until last month with China, and with the US. So with all the countries, they have relations, good relations. We have got 184 countries supported us for becoming the member of non-permanent seat recently in the United Nations. Large number of countries support India to be a permanent member. Then we also have something called Yoga Day, International Yoga Day. In the history of the United Nations, I believe that this was the first time that countries from across the spectrum, largest number of countries supported International Day of Yoga in India. First time after non-alignment, we are seeing the International Solar Alliance, a multilateral initiative that has come up. So he has ideas, he tries to take them. How much are implemented, how far they carried on, depends on the bureaucracy or foreign policy establishment or the country, because foreign policy diplomat does only one task, but then it has to be supported by the entire machinery of the government to deliver with the same pace. And that's where it matters. First time I can tell you we have an Africa policy. when Prime Minister Modi went to Uganda in Kampala, he really outlined 10 points of the basic guiding principles of India's policy towards Africa. I was posted in Africa, and it was extremely difficult to get the leaders to come and visit African countries, whereas Africa is going to be the next big part of the Afro-Asian century, in my view, from 2050 onwards.
Absolutely.
We cannot afford to. I remember when I was in 97 in Delhi, the Prime Minister of Singapore came and he said, you only look towards West, you never look towards East. Now, until then we had. Today, we have very close relationships with all the ASEAN countries. So, challenges will remain as long as there is a power competition between the major powers. How you navigate through it without getting hurt in the process will be the biggest challenge. Become far more proactive. And there is a problem is that the global environment does not depend on a single actor. So, but you have to anticipate and respond accordingly for various problems, and that is the job of the diplomat.
And one adjunct to this question,
I think that today we see in every which way. So,
Shyamji, your take on this?
Yeah, I was just asking one adjunct to this question. It was a nice thing.
Shyam, sir, your take on this?
No, I'll see. This is not my take. I have more interesting thing to listen from the ambassador Sam. The point was when he told that the foreign policy is extension of the Indian policy, or say domestic policy. And one interesting point is the domestic policy also has an economic thing to it, which is we are looking at the economic say diplomacy overseas. So when the China invest in India, or say some kind of countries which are not so friendly, they invest in India. What should be our take on it? Because we are talking about make in India, we are talking about various kind of programs to bring the capital to India. So how do we should respond to that kind of money?
well, we are already doing it. I think that, as you know, that there was a change in investments from neighboring countries. Although, as a part of liberalization, you allow the investments with least amount of problems, because it's a catch-22. I mean, the more difficult your problems policies become, the less easier it is to get the investment into the country. But there are certain countries which are trying to whose investments may connect with may impact on your national security. So those countries, you have to be careful in what kind of, in which areas. For example, now we have seen the 5G, what happened about China. Similarly, the apps that we have done it. So every country has to, India has to take the decisions in accordance with this national security in the first place. If it is a friendly country, and you must not say, I mean, if we have India first, so has America first. Trump has America first. So China has China first. They are also doing a big self-reliance today. Russia is also, for them, it's their country first. So it's a competition among various interests. We have to protect. Even if, I mean, personally, this is my view, investment is a scam. Money has no religion. So if you know from where it is coming, which source it is coming, and you have the internal firewalls to stop its negative impact.
Exactly.
Why not?
Very true.
Good,
Very
sir.
true.
Very,
Because
very
today,
good, very well stated, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anilji. In spite of your special schedule, tight schedule, you have been able to give us time. Thank you so much for your insights, which have been very, very interesting. And thank you so much, Neeranji and Shyamji, for your interesting questions. And I hope the viewers enjoyed all of it too. Thank you to all the viewers on behalf of Analytics.
Subscribe now and press the bell icon. Never miss an update.